In Charleston, 1844, a hushed rumor crept through the cobblestone streets like a chill wind. A girl whose beauty was unmatched, whose presence made even the most hardened traders falter. Her name was whispered in fear and desire, but never spoken aloud in polite company. The child was rumored to be no ordinary slave, born under a cursed star, with hair as white as a moonless night, and eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of time itself. That morning, she vanished. No footprints, no cries, no trace. Only the faint scent of iron lingered in the humid air. Traders, planters, and the city's elite were unsettled. The mysterious disappearance was more than a lost sale. It was a fracture in reality, a dark secret buried beneath the polite veneer of Charleston's social order. The town had long forgotten the whispers of the old, moss-draped churches and abandoned orphanages, where the air carried stories too obscene to recount. Yet, for one fleeting moment, everyone knew. Something unnatural had taken her, something that thrived on fear and longing. And though the search began immediately, the girl was gone, leaving behind only the dread that would haunt the city's corridors for decades. The auction house was a cathedral of greed and whispered corruption. Sunlight pierced the dusty windows, highlighting a sea of eager faces, men and women who saw people as currency, as vessels of labor and beauty. At the center stood the girl, yet not entirely, for there was a shimmer around her, like heat rising from the cobblestones. She did not cry or resist. She merely observed the crowd, eyes wide, seeing things they could not. Each bid was a heartbeat, a measure of desire that twisted into obsession. Traders spoke in polite tones, yet beneath their words lay a hunger unspoken, almost ritualistic. Planters murmured about her lineage, imagining wealth and influence. But the air held tension, unnameable and thick. She seemed older than her years, yet childlike, carrying the weight of secrets she could never voice. Some who glimpsed her later described a subtle shifting in the shadows, as though the room itself recoiled at her presence. By the end of the day, she was sold, not to the highest bidder, but to one whose intentions whispered of darkness beyond the material, a man with connections to Charleston's hidden, sinister institutions, whose estate hid more than tobacco and rice fields. This sale would mark the beginning of a horror no one dared write down. The girl's white hair became a symbol. In Charleston, rumors spread. She was cursed, possessed, or a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. Children feared her, whispering her name only when the sun had gone down. The elderly muttered prayers under their breaths, crossing themselves as if mere proximity could invite catastrophe. Her owners, at first proud, soon grew fearful. Objects moved without explanation. Cold drafts followed her footsteps through the halls of the plantation house. Shadows gathered where light had once dwelled. Her presence unsettled the natural order. Visitors reported hearing soft laughter in empty corridors, or glimpsing her standing in rooms that were locked, staring at walls as if conversing with unseen entities. Some began to speak of dreams, visions of the girl floating above the town, her hair cascading like white flames, and a sense of dread that would not lift. Church elders, who maintained public piety, secretly convened to discuss her fate. They feared exposure, yet feared more the power she might wield. The plantation, once a seat of control, now trembled under invisible currents. And yet, she remained composed, almost serene, as though she understood the secrets buried in Charleston's foundations, the dark lineage of families who profited from suffering and silenced the truths no one else could bear to confront. Rooms on the plantation began to disappear. Doors that had once led to storage or servants' quarters opened to darkness that smelled of decay. Furniture shifted slightly, as if pushed by invisible hands. The girl was always at the center. Servants whispered that she walked through walls, moving silently into spaces that should have been solid. Her eyes, pale and knowing, followed them, unblinking, revealing an understanding of the estate's hidden architecture. No map of the plantation accounted for the rooms she frequented. At night, those who lingered too long in her presence awoke with scratches on their arms or soaked in cold sweat. Some spoke of faint voices calling from beneath the floors, pleading, cursing, or chanting. Others reported seeing shadows twist in impossible shapes, forming grotesque parodies of humanity. The white-haired girl, it seemed, was both a guide and a sentinel, a living bridge between the material world and an unseen one. Planters attempted to confine her, chaining doors and windows. Yet by morning, chains were twisted, locks undone, and she stood in the hall, as though she had never been imprisoned. Whispers grew louder. She did not belong to the natural order, and Charleston itself would bear witness to this anomaly. The very air thickened around her, carrying an electric tension that frayed nerves and bent minds toward forbidden thoughts. Charleston's oldest church, steeped in history and power, held secrets darker than the city's streets. Elders remembered tales of women and children whose names were never recorded, offerings made in shadow, sacrifices justified under the guise of piety. The girl was not the first to attract attention, nor would she be the last, but she was unlike any who came before. Clergy spoke in coded whispers about her origins, hinting at bloodlines intertwined with the occult, but always stopping short, fearful of what might hear them. Parishioners, in ignorance, sang hymns to an unseen god, unaware of the rituals enacted behind walls thick with secrecy. Some nights, the girl was brought to the church under pretense, only to vanish within its halls, returning hours later with eyes haunted, yet brighter, as if knowledge had passed through her like fire. Candles burned low, shadows dancing across stone walls, forming symbols too archaic to decipher. Townsfolk sensed that the church, the auction houses, and the grand estates were linked by invisible threads of corruption and devotion to something older, something that demanded fear and silence. The girl's existence threatened these threads, yet she was powerless, or perhaps unwilling, to fight them. Observers noted the subtle shifts, pews slightly askew, inscriptions on the walls blurred overnight, and faint voices echoing through empty sanctuaries. Each event was a whisper of a larger, impossible truth, one that no one living had ever confronted. Beyond the city's gleaming streets, in the neglected quarters, stood an orphanage whispered about in Charleston's darkest tales. Its windows were grimy, its walls stained with the residue of forgotten sorrow. Here, children disappeared quietly, one by one, their names erased from ledgers and memories. The white-haired girl had never been an inmate, yet she was drawn to the orphanage as though it whispered her true origins. The caretakers, frail and nervous, spoke of a girl who appeared in corridors where no child had been housed, singing melodies that curdled the blood. At night, her presence twisted the air, lamps flickered, shadows stretched impossibly, and faint laughter echoed in the empty halls. Some children swore she conversed with the walls, conversing in a tongue older than Charleston itself. Locals avoided the building, claiming the spirits of the forsaken lingered, and that the girl carried both blessing and curse. Within these halls, the plantation and church found their reflection, control and secrecy maintained at the expense of innocence. The girl's white hair became a symbol of that transgression, a visible mark of an unseen power that stretched across the city. Every brick seemed to hum with suppressed knowledge, every creaking floorboard a warning. Charleston's elite feared exposure, but fear itself was insufficient. This girl existed beyond normal human authority, and she carried the weight of truths the town had long buried. Those who observed her in the orphanage left with minds frayed, haunted by the sense that the world was far older, darker, and more fragile than they had ever imagined. On the plantation, whispers spread like wildfire. Men who once smiled and joked in the warm light now avoided each other, their conversations halting whenever her name arose. She was no longer merely a slave. She was a phenomenon, an enigma that unsettled the very hierarchy they relied upon. Furniture moved overnight. Silverware vanished and reappeared on rooftops. Servants claimed she spoke to the air, as if listening to invisible interlocutors, sometimes laughing softly when none dared to look. The patriarchs convened in hushed councils, debating whether the girl was a witch, a divine messenger, or an omen of inevitable ruin. They consulted books on folklore and arcane rituals, yet each passage seemed to hint that she was older, deeper, more unknowable than anything recorded in human memory. Nightmares plagued the planters themselves, vivid visions of white hair flowing through corridors of endless darkness, of the earth swallowing their wealth and influence. They began to sense that her presence exposed their sins, both past and ongoing, and that every act of cruelty or secrecy had consequences they could not contain. Even in daylight, the air around her vibrated with menace and revelation. The girl did not speak of vengeance. She needed no words. Her mere existence acted as a mirror, reflecting corruption, desire, and hidden terror back at those who dared claim ownership of her. Charleston's elite had always controlled appearances, but the girl made the hidden obvious, a walking indictment of everything they pretended to forget. Charleston's streets became corridors of unease. Traders and merchants noticed shadows where none should fall, doors closing of their own accord. The wind carried whispers that no human lips had uttered. The white-haired girl, it seemed, was always present in these disturbances, sometimes glimpsed in alleys, sometimes at windows, her eyes unblinking, surveying. Children who passed her spoke of seeing visions, fires that had not yet burned, strangers who would arrive too late, secrets revealed too soon. Adults dismissed these accounts, attributing them to imagination or hysteria. Yet the patterns persisted. Something unseen and deliberate threaded through the city, tied inexorably to the girl, threading the lives of the powerful and the powerless alike into a web of anticipation and dread. Merchants noticed shipments misdirected, letters disappeared, only to reappear days later with cryptic markings. Even the city guards, confident in their authority, felt unease in the girl's vicinity, an ineffable warning that the natural order had been bent. Rumors began to emerge that she was not merely human, that her birth had been marked by unnatural phenomena, and that her destiny was entwined with forces both ancient and terrifying. Charleston's veneer of civility faltered, revealing the sharp edges of greed, lust, and fear. And as the white-haired girl moved silently among these streets, she carried with her the promise of revelation, and the threat of consequences too terrible for polite society to acknowledge. The estate that housed her became a labyrinth of tension. Rooms warped, floors creaked unnaturally, and servants vanished, only to be found staring silently in corners, unresponsive to speech. The patriarchs, once confident, descended into paranoia. The girl remained serene, yet observers swore her gaze penetrated beyond walls, into minds and histories she could not possibly have known. At night, the wind through the cotton fields whispered her name, carrying with it an oppressive knowledge of the family's sins, their complicity in horror both systemic and personal. Guests described strange occurrences during dinners. Wine spilled itself, portraits seemed to watch, and the girl would appear suddenly, standing beside them as if anticipating thoughts they had not yet formed. Her hair, glinting like white fire, was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Plantation life, once predictable, became a theater of uncertainty. Workers murmured about visions of the past, men flogged, children crying, hidden chambers beneath the soil. The estate seemed to live, breathing through the girl's presence. Each day, the tension escalated, until even the boldest planters feared the girl's silence more than any rebellion. They understood, deep in their bones, that she carried the memory of those who had suffered, the truth they had buried, and the power to confront them with it in ways no human law could constrain. One stormy night, the girl disappeared from her room, leaving behind a faint chill and the scent of burning leaves. Servants claimed to hear faint whispers, like chanting, echoing through hallways and fields. Windows rattled, and shadows deepened into shapes that should not exist. When she returned hours later, her eyes burned with a strange light, as if she had traversed a realm unseen, absorbing forbidden knowledge. The patriarchs noticed immediately. She spoke in riddles, half-understood words that made their hearts pound with dread. Dreams plagued those who witnessed her, dreams of vanished children, of twisted trees, of blood that flowed beneath the city like rivers. Even the priests consulted privately, debating if the girl was a messenger of divine wrath or a harbinger of doom. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Her presence now carried weight beyond observation. She had become an agent of revelation, unraveling Charleston's hidden corruption strand by strand. Nothing in her demeanor suggested malice, yet every glance seemed to expose the sins of those around her, the private horrors of wealthy men and women who had long relied on secrecy for survival. The estate had transformed into a crucible, testing morality, sanity, and courage, all under the watch of a child whose hair shone like moonlight over graves no one remembered. Servants began to vanish without explanation. Some disappeared from the kitchens, some from the fields, leaving only faint footprints that dissolved into dust. Panic grew among the remaining staff, though the white-haired girl remained eerily calm. Observers whispered that she moved with them, unseen, as if guiding, or perhaps deciding, their fate. Those who returned from her watch spoke of corridors that twisted impossibly, rooms that no longer obeyed geometry, and eyes that followed them when no one stood nearby. The estate's boundaries had become uncertain. Gates led to fields that had never existed, doors opened to empty voids. Elders whispered of an ancient curse, tied to the girl's lineage, hinting that she carried not only knowledge but judgment. Some thought she had become a vessel for something older than Charleston itself, an entity neither cruel nor kind, but inevitable. Each disappearance left behind the faint scent of iron and a whisper of laughter, hollow and unearthly. Plantation life decayed under invisible pressure. Daily routines, once sacred, became exercises in dread. And through it all, the girl's eyes seemed to shine with quiet omniscience, observing the world as if reading a book no one else could see. The city beyond the estate remained ignorant, but the family that had purchased her knew they were living on the edge of a revelation that could never be contained. Beneath the plantation, secret chambers were discovered, carved into the bedrock long before the current estate existed. They were filled with remnants of rituals, faded symbols painted on walls, and bones arranged in patterns that mirrored constellations. These rooms were never meant to be found, yet the girl moved among them as though she belonged. Historians would later claim they were storage cellars, yet those who entered after her presence reported whispers, chanting, and faint screams frozen in time. Candles that had not been lit for decades ignited themselves, illuminating white hair that glowed with unnatural light. The patriarchs began to understand that her arrival had awakened something dormant, something that had been embedded in Charleston's very foundation, a network of secrets, bloodlines, and forbidden knowledge preserved for centuries. The girl did not speak of it, yet she knew every corridor, every hidden passage, and every concealed truth. For her, the chambers were not frightening. They were home, a reflection of her own heritage, of a legacy that the city would never understand. And for those who dared observe, the chambers revealed more than stone and shadow. They revealed the fragility of human control and the inevitability of exposure. The orphanage in the city's shadows held keys to the girl's past. Caretakers whispered that she had been seen wandering its halls before her sale, yet no records existed of her presence. Children spoke of a moonlight sister, a pale girl with hair like fire, who appeared in dreams to warn of coming storms. The girl seemed drawn to these halls, and when she entered, the very air changed. Lamps flickered, floors hummed, and whispers rose from walls, telling stories of pain and neglect long forgotten. It became clear that she carried the memory of all who had been silenced, erased, or condemned, a living vessel of Charleston's suppressed sorrow. Elders and clergy who visited the orphanage later claimed a presence that defied logic, as if the girl had drawn shadows around her, shaping reality according to a pattern only she could see. Even the most devout prayed in silence, fearing that to confront her directly would invite catastrophe. And yet, she did not act with malice. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as though she were tracing the invisible network of suffering that had long been ignored. Those who glimpsed her in the orphanage felt the weight of history pressing upon them, and some swore that the city itself seemed to shiver in recognition of her power. Charleston's church had long maintained its public face of piety, yet in secret it had enforced obedience through fear. Clergy remembered rituals performed in hidden chapels, offerings made without acknowledgement, and children consecrated to purposes no one dared name. When the girl came into their midst, the very walls seemed to recoil. Bells tolled without wind, candles burned in reverse, and prayers echoed with unintended meaning. The elders convened in terror. She knew what they had done. Every unspoken sin, every misdeed, every hidden cruelty was reflected in her pale gaze. She became an agent of silent judgment, a living mirror revealing the consequences of decades of control and suppression. The clergy attempted to reason, to pray, and to persuade, but the girl's presence demanded nothing. She needed no authority, no sanction, for the weight of her being carried judgment itself. For the first time, Charleston's church confronted the fragility of its power, the impermanence of secrecy, and the impossibility of containing history. And outside, the city remained oblivious, blind to the reckoning already in motion. The family who owned her descended into paranoia. They heard footsteps when no one walked, laughter when no one spoke. Mirrors reflected not the present but visions of the past, hidden cruelties, betrayals, and forgotten crimes. The girl's hair, shining like spectral flame, became a focus of obsession. Servants whispered that she could read thoughts, that she understood intentions before they were formed. Patriarchs and matriarchs began leaving the estate, claiming business or illness, yet no one could escape. At night, the wind carried her name, and the rustling of trees sounded like a gathering of unseen witnesses. Her silence was the loudest condemnation. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her words were riddles, fragmented sentences that seemed to describe events yet to come. Those who attempted to disobey or manipulate her found themselves confronted with visions so vivid they questioned sanity itself. The estate was no longer theirs. It belonged to a memory, to a truth older than any living human, and the girl was both key and custodian. Fear, once private, became public in subtle ways. Servants fled, traders hesitated, and the city's gossip network grew restless. Yet, no one dared ask the question burning behind every glance. What, truly, was she? Charleston itself seemed to dream. People awoke with visions of fire, blood, and vanished children. Merchants saw shipments vanish, letters rewrite themselves, and shadows moving independently. The girl appeared in these dreams, her hair glowing, her eyes knowing, as if walking the line between worlds. Scholars later speculated that her presence had awakened something collective, a memory of corruption encoded into the city's very fabric. Night after night, townsfolk dreamed of her, in impossible gardens, at the edges of cliffs, in the abandoned halls of orphanages and churches. Each vision was a fragment of truth, a warning, a revelation. Those who ignored them were haunted during the day by whispers, by fleeting movements at the edge of vision, until reality itself seemed uncertain. Even the city's streets conspired, shifting subtly, bending logic, as though responding to her unseen guidance. Charleston, long built on secrecy, became a vessel for revelation, and the girl, silent, observing, impossible, was the axis around which the city's hidden sins rotated. The girl's hair was no mere anomaly. It became a symbol, a living prophecy. Elders spoke in hushed tones of the moon-born curse. Tales of children marked at birth with hair like snow, destined to confront injustice and reveal hidden corruption. Some claimed she was a harbinger, others a guardian, yet all feared her presence. As the estate's conditions worsened, whispers suggested that she had walked through the bones of Charleston's forgotten dead, carrying memories they had never shared. Servants and children alike spoke of her singing lullabies that healed or haunted, depending on one's heart. She seemed to bend time slightly, appearing in multiple locations within minutes, always observing, always remembering. The city began to see her as a mirror of its sins, a reflection of truths too terrible to confront. Her hair, flowing like spectral light, marked her as chosen by forces older than any law, any moral code. She was neither predator nor victim. She existed beyond these concepts, and her presence demanded recognition, awe, and fear. The patriarchs, priests, and traders finally convened in desperation, hoping to confront her. They demanded explanations, pleaded for mercy, and tried to bargain with her as if she were human. She listened silently, her eyes luminous, and spoke only once. "I see all that you have hidden. I carry it with me." The words were not loud, yet they reverberated through minds and walls alike. Panic gripped them. Some fell to their knees, others fled. The estate seemed to pulse with her awareness, doors locking and unlocking, floors shifting, shadows stretching to impossibility. For the first time, her power was undeniable, not violent, but inevitable. Every secret, every crime, every whispered word of oppression had been observed, recorded, and carried forward by her alone. No negotiation, no prayer, no wealth could change what she knew. And the city waited unknowingly, the tension simmering beneath polite civility, while one child, white-haired, impossible, held the memory of all sins and the keys to revelation. One morning, the estate awoke to emptiness. The girl was gone. Rooms that had shifted overnight were now static. Shadows no longer danced in impossible angles. Servants and patriarchs scoured the grounds, but there was no trace. Only a lingering coldness remained, and the faint scent of iron and fire. Rumors erupted across Charleston. Some claimed she had been taken by spirits, others that she had returned to the orphanage or the hidden chambers beneath the city. No one knew. Her absence did not bring relief. Only the weight of unspoken truths, of knowledge left unresolved. Her white hair became legend, a symbol whispered in fear and awe. The city had been marked, its streets, buildings, and elite forever haunted by what she had revealed and the certainty that nothing would ever remain hidden again. Decades later, Charleston still remembers her, though few admit it aloud. The girl's story persists in whispers of vanished children, hidden rooms, and the inevitability of revelation. Families tremble at the mention of her white hair. Churches recall the silent judgment she carried, and orphanages keep their halls empty and cautious. Scholars argue over her existence, folklore, myth, or true history. Yet every child who dreams of the city senses her presence, a reminder that the sins of the past cannot be erased, only remembered. Her legacy is not one of cruelty, but of inevitability. The world is far older, darker, and more fragile than human minds can comprehend. She was the impossible secret, the silent mirror, the child whose hair shone like spectral fire, and she ensured that Charleston would never forget the weight of hidden truth.